assume this is this on? Yeah. No, I just have to share. Yeah, as Steve said, I'm here really on behalf of Concern Worldwide to report on two pieces of research that they've carried out in recent years that within their Unheard Voices campaign, which seeks to draw attention to the needs of marginal farmers, and in the two pieces of research that I'm going to be talking about, specifically how they may be supported and what institutional support is available for them. So Concern's campaign, Unheard Voices, as I've said, was specifically to draw attention to the needs of this group, which they've defined as those households that are farming yet hungry, so they're not able to meet their own food needs and are in poverty. And part of the reason for this campaign is that although the small farmer has climbed the agenda and become much more prominent in policy discourse, and there's more funds going into agriculture, there is some concern that this particular group might miss these resources because they are less able to respond to commercial opportunities that arise, and this is an area that that policy is focusing on, and where the state sector isn't able or willing to provide services, they're less likely to be attractive to the private sector. So the two areas of research, first of all, was some work carried out by the Tanzania country team, looking at how what the experience was with the district agricultural development plans in Tanzania, how that planning process had incorporated the needs of marginal farmers, and also how it was carried out and the execution and spending of those funds. And then secondly, is a piece of work that was carried out in Zambia to look more closely at, if you like, hungry farming households, and in particular the role of women farmers in those households and how their needs may or may not be being met in feeding their families. So first of all, considering the district agricultural development plans in Tanzania, this comes about as part of decentralization policy in Tanzania, in which 75% of the agricultural sector budget is now, the aim is that is dispersed by the local government authorities, and furthermore that a good proportion, 75 to 85% of that money, goes directly to community level projects. And these projects are identified through a participatory planning exercise called Opportunities and Obstacles for Development, which is conducted at the village level and facilitated by ward facilitation teams, and then those projects and programs are brought together at the ward and the district level to form the agricultural development plans for that district. So so that was the planning process that the Tanzania team were looking at. And this slide just shows the main problems that they highlighted in their reports about what was happening with these funds. So although the planning process had a participatory agenda, and it was at village level, and there were exercises to try and incorporate the felt needs of the farmer groups who were represented at that level, one of the major obstacles was that because this planning process was quite slow and the development of the plans quite a complex process, by the time that the plans were approved and the funds dispersed, this was often in the third quarter of the year, so therefore not useful for the project planning activities. the budget tracking by Concern also noted that a lot of the funds that were allocated for these activities tended to be lost in other budget lines, and often for non-development activities as such, but in things like per diems and travel allowances and training costs. So it felt that a lot of the budgeted items were starved of funds because some of the spending was not getting through. And another concern about the planning process and how that fed into the spending was that this tended to generate lots of quite small projects without a coherent strategy across districts. So having said that, this monitoring started in 2006 and 2007, and Concern and other stakeholders have been working to try and advocate for changes to the process. Sorry, I've jumped onto a different thing. Sorry, I'll go forwards and then go back. And through that, they have managed to well, the timing of the disbursements has improved, so they are getting to projects earlier, and they also advocated for larger projects to try and encourage more strategic thinking across the district. And similarly with the question of late disbursements, scrutiny of projects and how the funds are dispersed have allowed some flexibility so that funds that do arrive late, there's a possibility for them to be spent in the following year rather than the sort of rush to spend that money before the end of the financial year. One of concerns has been about representation of marginal farmers in the planning process. So this was one area that they did look at closely, and they did find that there tended to be differences between lists of what farmers would commonly identify as problems, especially things like infrastructure, and the actual activities that were budgeted for in the programmes. So there's still a question mark here of whether this was a failure within the participatory planning process to successfully get the participation of those farmers and articulate those needs, or whether it was more that at the district level, some of those activities would get replaced by things that were more interesting or convenient to those people making the decisions. So that was just a brief outline of the process of looking at those of the agricultural development plans in Tanzania. And then what I'd like to look at now is some work we did in Zambia to look more closely at the challenges facing women farmers in particular, because of concerns focus on hunger and nutrition, to ask what institutional support is available to women, and also try to get some feedback from women farmers about how they think they can be best supported. Western Province, Zambia, where we did this work, it's fairly remote from centres. Although there's a good road from Lusaka to the district capital now, within the province the transport links are very poor. The soils are sandy and infertile, and the livestock population has crashed because of recurrent disease. So within this context, rural households still have livelihoods based on agriculture and natural resources, but there's low agricultural potential. And for many decades, the support for agriculture has been very strongly focused on maize cropping, which within this context of quite a risk-prone environment perhaps is not the best strategy for household food security. The other aspect of livelihoods is that because these farmers are within the Zambezi floodplains, and the water management is a big issue, too much at sometimes, too little at others, but it seems that quite often emergency responses to flooding have become a regular feature and become quite an important part of people's survival strategies. I don't know how, I don't want to dwell on this if time's running out, but I'll just to say, in terms of the policy context, as I said, traditionally the support has been geared very much towards maize, with high levels of support in the 80s, withdrawn in the 90s, and then more recently there's been more attention to providing some support for vulnerable households through food security projects. More recently, the National Agricultural Policy has emphasised commercialisation and promotion of farming as a business. And this is sort of quite an important question for our marginal farmers, in that, especially in these remote regions where agricultural potential is low, to what extent, what possibilities exist for commercialisation of agriculture in these zones, yet they're areas where populations are dependent on agriculture and there are very little alternative livelihood opportunities. So at present, the poverty reduction programmes within the Ministry of Agriculture are dominated by the fertiliser support programme. However, this programme has received quite a lot of scrutiny, and with critical comments that although it absorbs a lot of the budget for the Ministry of Agriculture's poverty reduction programmes, that it's not successful either in reaching poorer farmers or in raising yields. And furthermore, that spending may crowd out investment in other areas which may be beneficial for poorer farmers. Now, I know this is probably impossible to see, but I'll talk through it anyway. What we did, we visited 5 villages and had interviews and focus groups with women in those villages. And this table is the result of some institutional mapping exercises carried out with women in each village to list all the institutions that they had any contact with. And what this showed us very clearly, if on the left-hand side we start with health, going down to schools, education, then chief and local authorities, churches, government agencies, NGOs, and the area farmers associations, which are the farmers' organisations. And we found that in terms of contact, across all villages, they had good contacts with health clinics, which visited every month. Schools, women's contacts with schools were good in most villages. And also these schools provided a venue for other activities, whether it be selling food items or other NGO activities. So this sort of provided a bit of a forum for other activities. Churches, more or less, in each village. But as we go down, when it came to government agencies or whether people had any interaction with the Ministry of Agriculture or Extension Services, and this table's gone a bit funny, but from the left, there was the disaster management unit, so like a flood relief programme. By the river, the fisheries departments visited, but just to check on the fishing ban. In the other 3 villages, the Ministry of Agriculture was mentioned once, but with the comment that they just visit those that have got stuff, have got things. So there was a real lack of contact with the ministries of any government agencies, apart from health and education. In terms of NGO activity, there's more activity than with government agencies, but here again, it seemed significant that the 3rd village in the middle, they listed a whole range of NGOs that had come and gone, and this village was the one that was closest to the town and had the most, the best transport links, whereas the most remote village had the least. It was they had a water pump installed in 2006. So in terms of NGOs accessing these more remote communities, it seemed that was not very successful. And then finally, the area farmers associations are mentioned because this is the way in which most agencies, both government and NGOs, reach farmers, that they are invited to become a member of a area farmers association, and that's how they access resources. So taking this information and combining it with what we could gather from policy statements from the various ministries, this diagram was just put together to try and show the various routes through which women farmers accessed resources across sectors, whichever area. And I can't really, maybe best if I stand up. As I mentioned before, all support for agriculture is generally directed through the area farmers associations and the interest groups that form out of that. So if women don't participate in those interest groups or those area farmers associations, then they miss out on the other avenues of support, either through the fertiliser support programme or the extension services or NGO interventions. Where women were accessing services, which is on the blue side, was through, as I mentioned before, things like the clinics, schools, and also directly through relief interventions and, in theory, through the food security pack, which is delivered from the Ministry of Community Development and Social Services, although in practice none of the women we interacted with had received the food security pack, but in theory that would be a resource that would flow directly to them rather than through the sort of traditional agricultural routes. So, to summarise, we found very little support for women's livelihood activities, including agriculture, and we were looking particularly at household nutrition. So it was also evident that there was, although agriculture was very important for household nutrition, there was little coordination across ministries to reach these objectives. As I've mentioned, the use of the area farmers associations to deliver support also meant that the more marginal groups are at risk of missing out. And then, interestingly, the good coverage by the health interventions raised the possibility of whether agricultural extension messages could be delivered, especially those that could impact directly on household nutrition, could be better or also delivered through the health services, who are at present advising women on what they should eat or feed their families, but not really advising on how they might access those better foods. So, to sum up, I've tried to identify some challenges of meeting more marginal farmers. I think their remoteness is a huge problem, and in both Tanzania and Zambia, the low numbers of extension staff and their poor mobility impedes that direct contact with agricultural advice. Poor transport infrastructure impedes any commercial development, and in both Zambia and Tanzania, the problem of getting these less commercial farmers involved in the community boards or groups that can influence decisions is a problem. Okay. Thank you.
Right.